To our event called Science at the Flats. We're happy to have you join us tonight on this drizzly Thursday evening. This is the first series of research seminars. So tonight we'll be talking about science at Maplewood Flats. Next Thursday at the same time, 6:30, we have another presentation about the Habitat and Cultural Use Plan. So we invite you to join us there as well. We'll be posting links to those events in the chat and also on all our social media platforms, so you can find those there. And then also we'll be posting a link if you're interested in donating to Wild Bird Trust for participating in this event or just in general. Alice will be popping that in the chat soon as well. So again, thanks for joining us. We're really excited to have you all here. I see there's a few more people logging on, so we'll get going and then they can join us. Okay. So before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that myself, Wild Bird Trust, and Maplewood Flats exists on the unceded lands and waters of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. Maplewood Flats and the Wild Bird Trust is within the traditional and unceded lands of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, the original stewards of this land. So as an organization and a site, we are in the process of decolonizing our practices and our ways of thinking. So as we begin this conversation tonight about research at Maplewood Flats, I want to acknowledge the constructs and limitations of Western science and also the depth of traditional knowledge held by Tsleil-Waututh elders and members regarding the land we now call Maplewood Flats that we will be discussing tonight. Okay, so here's an agenda for this evening's presentation. We'll start by talking about just broadly about research at Maplewood Flats, so give you a bit of context, talk about the vision of our research and also our research committee, how that's organized. Then we'll go on to an overview of a handful of different projects we have here. And then following, we'll talk about 3 of those projects in depth. So one of them will be the monthly bird counts, the Barts Channel restoration, and then my colleague Marissa will take on the Purple Martins project. And then finally, we'll end by just talking about some research priorities and the goals for the future. Okay, here we go. So research at Maplewood Flats. As many of you know, Wild Bird Trust is a nonprofit society that manages the conservation area of Maplewood Flats. And so our mission at Wild Bird Trust is to provide a sanctuary through ecological protection and restoration and support communities with education, culture, and reconciliation programs. The flats were designated as a conservation area in 1993, and since that time, many research projects have taken place. They have ranged from short-term collaborations with universities such as BCIT and CAP, all the way to long-term volunteer-led studies. So a lot of really interesting stuff has gone on here throughout the course of the organization's history. But we are really focusing on making our research centered around both ecological protection, restoration, and reconciliation. So these are our core pillars. And so our research is committed to upholding both conservation and reconciliation through consulting and collaborating with Tsleil-Waututh Nation, incorporating traditional knowledge, promoting native species plant growth, and also traditional cultivation. And in order to guide these efforts, recently Wild Bird Trust has created a research committee. And this committee is made up of staff, board members, volunteers, and community members, all who are interested in supporting the many research projects at the Flats. We meet about once a month and we talk about research priorities, research actions, and how we can best support the different projects going on at the Flats. So that's a little bit of an overview about, what is important at the Flats in terms of research and how we conduct that research. So like I said, conservation and reconciliation focused with a heavy hold in collaboration. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to talk about a handful of different projects we have going on at the Flats, just kind of a brief overview before we go into our 3 kind of case studies. So first I'm going to talk about invasive species management. As visitors to Maplewood Flats, you may have noticed that much of the site is occupied by Himalayan blackberry or English ivy, the common invasives that we see here on the coast. In 2017, Chloe Hartley, who was working on her master's, did the first site study of invasive species to map what was on site. And so we plan to resurvey the site every 5 years in order to continue that understanding of what's on site, to get a better quantification of how much invasive species is taking up the site and where it is. And this will be really important to just tell us, like, in terms of conservation goals and restoration. And then the next project that we have is the amphibian assessment. And so this is an annual wetland survey that happens in March every year. And this is just to monitor species diversity and abundance within the wetlands. It's been going on for a handful of years now, and we've identified species such as the northwestern salamander and the Pacific chorus frog. And then the third project on this slide is the water quality monitoring project. And this began due to a 2019 copper contamination that was found in the upper wetlands. And so following up with this contamination, we are collaborating with Environment and Climate Change Canada, our neighbors, to determine the source. And so we are working on sampling groundwater, wetlands, and adjacent soil in order to determine where the copper is coming from. Okay, and then additionally, we have a few more projects going on. So we have some historical surveys of soil in the site from various groups. These include data from the Port of Vancouver. There's a CAPU students report that we also have regarding soil surveys, and as well a District of North Van engineering survey. And so with all of this information and this historical information, what we really want to do is bring it together and identify how it can all be used, possibly identify some trends that we see and how we want to move forward with these studies and with this information. And then the final project that we have that I'm going to talk about briefly is the small mammal survey. So this began due to a 2019 BCIT group that came to the site to study small mammals, and they were looking at the capacity of Maplewood Flats to support small mammal populations through a live mark recapture program. Through the survey, they found North American deer mouse and also vagrant shrew, along with other species. So this was really exciting. Again, a baseline understanding of what's at the site. And as a research committee, we've been discussing the potential to set up a few wildlife cameras across the site, again, to just see if we can identify the abundance and diversity of small mammals on site. And also there's the resource of the greeting hut. So when visitors come to Maplewood Flats, they can record what species they've seen on site, including small mammals. And so this is also another valuable source of information that we could use within this project. So here are some photos about the different projects I've just been talking about. On the left here is a photo from the BCIT small mammal research project. So you can see, I think it looks like they're measuring what to me seems like a North American deer mouse. And then on the right here, we have a photo of a red-legged frog egg mass from the amphibian survey. And then down on the bottom right is a recent photo from actually earlier this week. We had a workshop regarding yellow flag iris on the western salt marsh. And so we had some staff and other participants come and learn about how to manage yellow flag iris. So what we did in this site, it's a small portion of the yellow flag iris on the marsh that we identified to work with. And we actually cut down all the vegetation on site and on that portion. And then after we did that, we covered the whole area with this tarping, and we dug trenches to tuck it all in on the sides and added stakes and rocks on top. And so what this does is it provides a layer so that no oxygen and no more no more growth can occur, and hopefully we'll be able to go back in about 1 year and everything on top of there will have died, including all of the yellow flag iris on the soil and the rhizomes below, and then we'll be able to take it off, and native species will begin to grow in that area in order to start to manage this yellow flag iris population in the salt marsh. So that was a really exciting event, and if you are interested more in that, we will be having another research seminar about that project, so stay tuned for that. Okay, so that wraps up the just handful grab bag of different projects we have, and now we're going to move on to our research projects in depth. So I'm going to start by talking about the bird counts that we have happening on Maplewood Flats, and then we'll go into the Barts Channel restoration, and finally Marissa will follow up with the Pearl Martin project. Okay. So in terms of the bird counts, this has been a long-term project that has been volunteer-led on the flats, which has provided just like a massive amount of data and information about the abundance and diversity of species on site. And so today I'm going to talk to you about the historic bird count data, and then we'll talk about the current bird counts and the future of the bird counts. And then we'll talk a bit about how we're going to integrate this information into eBird and also different citizen science projects, specifically relating to Birds Canada projects, both federally and provincially. So really talking about how we can use the information gathered at Maplewood Flats to provide really robust information to support other conservation projects. Okay, so historically, we have a wide range of data collected over the years by volunteers, and what we're really hoping to do is to centralize this data. We want to start exploring that data potentially through student research project partnerships, and really start to look at historic patterns. So what bird species were on site and how that has changed over the past 25 years, what bird populations, how the level of bird populations and how that has changed over time, and then also changes across different areas of the site. So what birds are inhabiting what areas and why that might have been changing. So identifying also species increase or decline, and again, possible causes for why that may be happening. We particularly want to consider vulnerable species that are identified vulnerable at a provincial level, so we can better manage Maplewood Flats to support those species. So once we know what's on site and where it is and how those trends are changing, we can actually start to work with, okay, what are we going to do at Maplewood Flats to support these species? And the data that we have that's been collected for so many years is such a valuable source of information. So we really want to make it accessible to use and to start to, really map out the history of what has been collected. Okay, so the current bird counts, like I said, we're working to streamline the past and present protocol. And we want to ensure that our protocol is consistent between current observers. So as we move forward, we want to make sure that our data is totally comparable, and that it is rigorous and robust, and that it is really, really useful for us at Maplewood Flats, but also for other groups and other programs. So we seek compatibility with Birds Canada databases. So they were formerly Bird Studies and now they're Birds Canada. So we want to produce data that can be used within these formats. So currently we have, how the bird count looks is that we have 25 locations on site. So volunteers will meet and they will go to each site and they will spend 3 minutes at each site recording whatever birds they see or hear. However, we're finding that these sites may not be completely independent, as they can be close together, and we may be having an overlap of sightings. And so what we may need to do is drop some of the points out, or only count the birds within points on like a separate list that doesn't include those locations, just in order to really like make our protocol as clean and clear as possible, so that, like I said, it can be used for these other research projects. And then currently, I also want to talk about the fact that we are aiming to streamline our counts to be usable with eBird. So eBird is a website and an app that you can use to record bird sightings. Many of you may be familiar with eBird. So both the bird counts and any visitors to Maplewood Flats can record their sightings under the headline North Vancouver Maplewood Conservation Area. And eBird data is automatically sent to Birds Canada. So this is like a really powerful kind of data streamlining avenue that we want to take full advantage of. So, you know, by streamlining our protocols, we can then get our information to eBird, to Birds Canada through eBird really clearly. So that's kind of where the current birds counts are and what we hope to do in that sense. Okay, so this is the last part that I'm going to talk about for the birds counts. So these are 3 different Birds Canada projects that we hope to support through building our birds count project. So the first is Important Bird and Biodiversity Area, which is also referred to as IBA. So Maplewood Flats is a part of an IBA, which includes English Bay, Broad Inlet, and Howe Sound. And so IBAs are a science-based initiative to identify, conserve, and monitor a network of sites that provide essential habitat for Canada's bird populations. It really works on connecting people and birds in order to create powerful conservation. So this is something that our bird count data will contribute towards. The second project is the BC Breeding Bird Atlas. And so this is basically a website and a database that holds information about bird species and abundance. So on the right here, you can see the spotted towhee, and the map is all the different sightings of it. And so the red is a confirmed sighting, the orange is a probable, and then the yellowish color is a possible. So it's basically like this massive atlas or database of different sightings and abundance. So again, a really powerful form of information that all kind of funnels into one place. And then the last project that we hope to support through our bird counts that I'm going to talk about is the BC Coastal Waterbird Survey. This is a volunteer-based long-term monitoring program that was established in 1999. And the goal is to assess the impacts of natural and human-induced environmental change on BC waterbird populations. So this project, what happens is around the second Sunday of every month, hundreds of citizen scientists in BC help Birds Canada monitor coastlines by participating in the BC Coastal Waterbird Survey. And this provides long-term data on the abundance and distribution of waterbird species along BC's coast. And something that's really important and that can come of this information is that it also provides valuable baseline data in the event of a disaster, specifically an oil spill, which obviously would greatly impact waterbird populations. So the Maplewood Flats plans to initiate and contribute to the Birds Canada program by joining this area that you can see on the screen here, LMV. But this would mean that we would have to set up our own protocol for this specific waterbird survey. So this would be separate from our bird count survey. So we hope to join this BC Coastal Waterbird Survey, but first we would have to set up this other protocol. But yeah, really exciting project that could totally fit into our kind of research goings-ons at Maplewood Flats. Okay, so that's everything for the bird count or bird counts. Now I'm going to go in and talk about our second in-depth case study project today, which is the Barts Channel and the Barts Channel restoration. So for those of you who have visited Maplewood Flats, you'll be familiar with this channel. It runs from Dollarton Highway and feeds into Broad Inlet through the southern side of Maplewood Flats in the Mud Flats. And actually, before working at Maplewood Flats, I I was unaware of the unique history of this site and actually merely thought it to be like a stream or just some kind of inlet, but didn't realize kind of the really unique history behind it. So the Barts Channel is called the Barts Channel because that's exactly what it was, a barge channel. It's an artificially constructed channel that was built in the 1920s to transport sand from a sand and gravel company that was located on the other side of Dollarton Highway in towards the inlet. So the channel was dredged through the mudflats and up through the barge channel to be able to connect this sand and gravel company to the inlet. So originally the dimensions of the barge channel would have been a lot deeper and wider in order to accommodate for these barges, but in the 1970s, the channel was filled as the Vancouver Harbour Board prepared this land for development, which ended up not happening. So we're left with this kind of like post-industrial stream environment within the conservation area. So really an interesting history, and it really sets up this environment for some interesting goings-ons, I would say. So this is a map. As you can see, Dollarton Highway on the top of the map, and that orange dot is the stormwater inflow. And so there's a culvert there where runoff from Dollarton Highway feeds into the Barts Channel, and then it follows down south, and there's also an inflow from Environment Canada before flowing all the way underneath the bridge that you may have crossed as a visitor, and then out onto the mudflats. So as a post-industrial site, like I said, there are some interesting conditions, and I'm going to talk you through some of those today. I want to acknowledge that many of these findings are based on a 2019 BC Students Report this past winter that have provided us with a lot of great research and knowledge regarding the site. So the current conditions that I'm going to talk about are the habitat complexity, pollutants, low species diversity, and industrial waste. So currently the Barts Channel lacks habitat complexity within the stream itself and the stream banks. So the unnaturally steep stream banks, because of the industrial history, make it really difficult for plant species to grow. And like much of the rest of Maplewood Flats, there is a large presence of invasive species such as English ivy and Himalayan blackberry. And then within the stream, there's also limited habitat complexity for aquatic species to utilize. So in natural streams in the area, we would see that they would be surrounded by large woody trees, and these would eventually fall into the stream and provide really critical habitat for a variety of species, but particularly fish. But due to this industrial history, there aren't a lot of trees surrounding the channel. And so we have a very limited amount of large woody debris within the stream due to this like low level of recruitment. Okay, so then in terms of pollutants, as I mentioned, there is an inflow from Dollarton Highway, and so that it causes a large amount of runoff to flow directly into the Barts Channel, which can potentially bring a large level of pollutants. And also I want to mention that there is a proposed development north of Dollarton Highway, which could also increase the amount of pollutants entering the Barts Channel through that culvert. So, you know, there currently is pollutants, but also we're looking at the fact that there is room for an increase due to the potential of development. And then the next condition is the low species diversity. So we want to acknowledge that the mudflats around Maplewood Flats once supported a diversity of wildlife, including shellfish, fish, shorebirds, and mammals. And due to industrialization, we've seen a decrease in this, you know, across the board. But when we're specifically looking at the Barts Channel, it's a really, really low amount of diversity we have here due to the industrial history. So in the northern reaches, we see very little diversity, and then in the southern reaches, we see a little bit more diversity, and this is actually due to just this one kind of specific habitat, this one boulder that's providing like a little bit more habitat complexity for those species. And then the last condition I want to talk about is the industrial waste present along the banks of the Barts Channel. So there's materials such as roof shingles, concrete, metals, and other construction materials. And these are likely to contribute to the contamination of the site. So that's kind of the current conditions, obviously like greatly impacted from the past industrialization and kind of moving forward what we have to work with in terms of restoration. So who lives here? Who lives in this post-industrial site? The BCIT report identified that, they did a benthic invertebrate survey, and they identified that they saw aquatic sow bugs, scud, and also aquatic earthworms. And so these findings suggest that there is some pollution, as none of these species are classified as pollutant intolerant, but the actual levels we still have yet to identify. And then fish data for the channel is extremely limited. However, there was a survey done in 1999 on the mudflats, so not actually in the channel, but on the surrounding mudflats, where they found chum, chinook, flounder, Pacific staghorn scalpin, and stickleback. And so obviously this is not a reflection of what is present in the channel today, but possibly could be, you know, a reflection of what could possibly live in the channel if the habitat was improved. And then the photo here that I have on the right is a picture of that one rocky reef that provides a lot of habitat that I was speaking about and really improves the diversity of the site on those southern reaches. So there you can see sea urchins, sea stars, and sea anemones just like surrounded on that one single boulder. So definitely I would recommend next time you take a walk across the bridge to take a look there and see if you can spot anything. Okay, so this is the last slide for the Barge Channel project, and I'm going to talk about the proposed restoration actions we have for this project. So obviously through the BCIT report and through other findings, we can see that this could be potentially an extremely valuable site for a variety of species, given it was provided a bit of tension in terms of restoration. So the first action we have is the removal of industrial waste. So we have to remove this waste in order to promote positive restoration in other senses. So that would just be actually like the manual removal of the shingles and the asphalt that I mentioned before. And then the next step would be creating rock reefs. And so rock reefs and boulders would be added to the areas of the channel where water is always present. So not necessarily those northern reaches where the tide might pull a bit of the water out, but like the southern and central regions for sure. And so rocks of varying sizes from 0.5 meter to 2 meters would be added in clusters, randomly dispersed around the channel. And these boulders and rock reefs would provide habitat complexity to the ecosystem and increase substrate for different species such as salmon, invertebrates. And then the next restoration action would be to add large woody debris. And so, like I said, logging of the banks due to the industrial history has decreased the natural recruitment of large woody debris. And this has decreased the abundance and complexity of shelter and feeding areas for fishes and inverts. Root rods and sections of tree trunks ballasted to large boulders would be added to the stream in order to provide that increased habitat. We propose to use Western red cedar and Douglas fir as they have the longest lasting time in water before breaking down. Okay, and then the final restoration action is the reestablishment of native vegetation. So as I mentioned, there's a large population of invasives. So part of that would be removal of these invasives and then the second part would be planting native vegetation. So we would have to remove the blackberry and English ivy through manual removal, and then planting of native vegetation would occur in 2 different sites. So the upper bank zone and then the lower bank zone. And the upper bank zone, so the northern regions, would be planted with trees and shrubs, and then the lower bank zone would be planted with smaller species such as grasses and herbaceous species that are salt tolerant and can withstand tidal fluctuations. And then in addition to the planting along the stream banks, we would also do in-stream planting, and this would occur in the northern end of the channel. And the main goal of this would be to provide a filtration mechanism for that predicted runoff that will be coming in from Dollarton Highway. Yeah, and then increasing the amount of overhanging riparian vegetation will also be advantageous as it increases shading, lowers stream temperatures, and increases oxygen levels. So just reestablishing a native ecosystem and also providing new habitat and filtration mechanisms for the site. So those are our 4 proposed restoration actions. It's a big project, but it really has the potential to be such an important ecosystem for a lot of species, both plant and animals. Okay, so now I'm going to hand off to Marissa, who is going to share her screen.
Hi, everybody. All right. So hi, my name is Marissa, and I'm the Environmental Programs Coordinator with the Wild Bird Trust this summer. And for this part of the presentation, like Kirsten mentioned, I'll be talking about the Purple Martins, and more specifically, the Purple Martin Nest Box program at Maplewood Flats, which has been operating and monitoring Purple Martins in the flats for the past 25 to 26 years. And to preface this conversation, we need to know a little bit more about Purple Martins. So the population we find here in BC is the western subspecies of Purple Martin, which is genetically distinct from the eastern population found east of the Rockies, of course. And in BC, the western Purple Martin occupies the northernmost edge of its range. And for this reason, historically, their population in BC has probably never been especially large, and is often subject to fluctuations due to climate and weather patterns, so pretty common here in BC, and the population trends of southern subpopulations, such as in Washington. So let's go over some facts about Purple Martins. First of all, if you thought they look like swallows, you're not wrong. They are, in fact, the largest swallow in North America. And like all swallows, they are aerial insectivores, meaning they forage for insects on the wing or in flight. And because of this feeding behavior, they can be very sensitive to cold, wet weather, which of course significantly decreases the presence of flying insects. During the nesting or breeding season, a wave of cold weather of only 3 to 4 days could cause a high juvenile mortality rate for the season. So they're pretty sensitive to weather. Additionally, Purple Martins are cavity nesters. Historically, they would use woodpecker holes in trees or snags in open woodland areas or near freshwater, but they've now adapted to using log pilings and now almost exclusively uses colony nest boxes across BC. So another important issue to note with Purple Martins is that they, along with other aerial insectivore species, are experiencing population declines across North America. So last year, the North American Bird Conservation Initiative released the State of Canada's Birds Report, which is basically a meta-analysis of all of Canada's bird population trends. And it found that aerial insectivores, such as swallow species and nighthawks, et cetera, are experiencing the largest rate of population decline across Canada. And these declines are often attributed to pesticide use and the effects of climate change, and most notably what is called phenological asynchrony. So that essentially means that scientists are seeing more and more a loss of synchrony between insect emergence and bird arrival because of higher temperatures. So there's less food availability along birds' regular timed migration routes and breeding grounds. So it's pretty important to note. So in BC, so what about our purple martins in BC? Historically, purple martins occupy the lower Fraser River lowlands, even downtown Vancouver and on Vancouver Island on the east coast from Campbell River to Victoria. And they experienced steep declines in the 1940s that were associated with log piling removals and European starling establishment. So basically they were losing a lot of their nesting spots. By 1949, they're only breeding on Vancouver Island, unfortunately. And by 1985, there were only 5 known breeding pairs in BC. So the situation seemed pretty dire. However, in 1994, purple martins returned to the lower mainland when Maplewood Flats, they started to return to the lower mainland when Maplewood Flats began its Purple Martin Nest Box program. And along with many other successful Purple Martin Nest Box conservation programs that have been established throughout their historical range, the population has continued to rise in BC. So as you can see in that graph there, it's looking pretty great overall. And as of January 2019, there are approximately 120 active purple martin nests, purple martin colonies in British Columbia, which is quite an impressive recovery from their state just 30 years ago. And here's a map showing a lot of those colonies along the southern coast of BC. All right. Since 1994 in Maplewood Flats, we now have around 100 nest boxes that we install on the pilings in the spring. The pilings are also called dolphins. And these are installed by the site manager and other volunteers. And they install them before the first purple martins arrived. And that's achieved by kind of keeping track of sightings of scout individuals of the population coming from the south. After the breeding season, the nest boxes are taken down after the last purple martins have fledged. And here are some pictures, just kind of out on a mission. You see our site manager and a volunteer ferrying over a bunch of those nest boxes. And on the right, I think this picture was taken last year. And that's how we install them and how they look on the pilings. And then once they're brought ashore, these nest boxes are examined, each of them. They look for any evidence of nest building. Are there any eggs left over? Does it look like there is some success there? Are there any dead chicks or adults? And then they estimate sort of the amount of approximate amount of breeding pairs that were active in those nest boxes. And then, yeah, so that's how it looks when they bring them ashore, and some obviously failed eggs from some of those nest boxes. And then after they finish examining each nest box, they scrape out the interior and all the mess, and then they store them over winter for next summer, next breeding season. So that's pretty much it for our purple martins at the Maplewood Flats. I heard that the last year, the number of there's evidence of nesting in around 86 nest boxes. So right now we're trying to figure out if we should change our methods, if we need to be doing more to monitor the population of Maplewood Flats. But this is how it is right now. And we're pretty proud of our role in the recovery of purple martins in the South Coast. And I'm going to throw it back to Kirsten to finish up with the presentation. There you go.
Great, thanks, Marissa. Okay, so just a few more slides from me here. So this is just our final slide about talking about our next steps and kind of our research priorities. So after hearing about all that's going on at the Flats, you can imagine that there's quite a few things that we foresee and that we hope to get done, but really at the forefront right now is the monthly bird surveys. So really identifying how to streamline our protocol and how to really make succinct and useful surveys that can be used for these other provincial and federal projects, and then also compiling the data that we do have and using it to see any trends or try to understand like declines or increases through that data. And then our other priority area is the invasive species management. And so going off of our yellow flag iris workshop that we just had, we really see a need to start tackling invasive species on site. And so the first step will be to map the invasive species. And then by mapping them, we can begin to identify control priorities and start to develop a plan of how we want to address invasives on site. So those are just two of our major priorities, but obviously a lot of exciting things going on. Okay, and then yeah, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks to Marissa for taking on the Purple Martins. It was really great to have your support. And if you guys have any questions, you can speak up now and unmute yourself, or we throw them in the chat and we can answer them.
Hi, I'm Rob Alexander. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. I noticed recently there's a purple loosestrife popping up everywhere around the mudflats, especially around the Pocket Marsh area and some other spots close to the West Lake. So that's a really bad invasive piece. You got to get rid of that. So.
Yeah.
It's probably being brought in by other people walking with it, going to Rifle Bird Sanctuary or something.
Yeah, there's definitely some purple loosestrife on site. I was with some of our site maintenance volunteers a few weeks ago, and over 2 weeks we pulled out maybe, I think it was 6 bags of purple loosestrife that we pulled from the Pocket Marsh.
Oh my God!
Not the Pocket Marsh. It's the one. The Park Street Marsh. The Park Street Marsh. My bad.
Oh right, yes. That area too has some purple loosestrife. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So I think we're aware of it, but it's, at this point, it's just management, and we're just trying to get as much as possible. But we're really happy with pulling out that amount over a few weeks.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, it's Leanne here. Just noting that Catherine and Rob both also shared some of what they've seen in what I'm assuming is the Barge Channel. And so that just really speaks to the fact that we have so many eyes on site, and the more we can integrate, you know, the folks that come to the flats a lot, giving them mechanisms to contribute to the research and observations. And, you know, obviously when in our current COVID situation, we have to be careful about doing things like the bird survey, where we're kind of limiting who's conducting that every month, but just wanting to do stuff safely and creating mechanisms for the community, such as I'm also seeing a volunteer opportunities inquiry there. So we are working on ways to integrate you. If you're interested in joining the Habitat Committee, that's one where this research committee is actually a subcommittee of the Habitat Committee. So so if it depends on your skills and interests as well, we have other volunteer opportunities as well.
Yeah, I just want to mention that these anecdotal kind of observations of species in the Barts Channel are really great instigators of scientific surveys and studies. So however we can get that information, or I know some of you are members, that you can send that to the relevant committees, that would be great.
I have photos of these species in the Barts Channel, Pacific sand lance and northern anchovy and even salmon.
That's wow. Great. Yeah, I saw your comment here. That's pretty cool. You know, that's pretty interesting. And obviously we haven't had a like Kirsten mentioned, a very thorough fish survey done in the Barts Channel in more than 30 years. So I think that's something that we should look at, and that's, yeah, it's pretty exciting. And there's one comment Leanne mentioned about interest in volunteer opportunities. There was a volunteer orientation I hosted a few weeks ago, but just generally, she mentioned there's some committees that you can join once you're a member. And there's also some other positions like site maintenance, exhibit interpreters, trail hosts, nature house hosts. There's the Coast Salish Plant Nursery. They're always looking for keeners to come in there and help them with the plants. And data entry, which is very vital for us as well. And yeah, we have lots of positions. You can email us at volunteer@wildbirdtrust.org if you're keen to join. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, and maybe I'll just jump in if there's no immediate questions. Again, it's Leanne. Just that a lot of this work comes out also of our habitat and cultural use plan that we're finalizing, which Kirsten in particular is helping us advance over the next few months. We do work closely with Tsleil-Waututh in that regard. We also work with the Port of Vancouver, who leases the land to Environment Canada, our neighbor, and then we are through them have an agreement to manage the site. So Wildbird Trust manages the site and are trying to improve how we work with and in relation with Tsleil-Waututh, whose land we're on. So this research is also connected to what they're doing generally in the Burrard Inlet, and so we're very cognizant of our connections and responsibilities as collective stewards to the lands and waters. And so this research work, as Kirsten and Marissa have noted, also is relying on students' work. So BCIT, for example, I know we'll be working with Capilano University students. So we have benefited a lot from students' work and interest in our site, and are developing or ensuring that there are good protocols for other groups to come request to doing research on site that can only benefit us all. So just wanted to make sure that was clear too. And just thanks to Chloe Hartley in particular, who's been the Habitat Committee Chair for that, and Tom, one of our board members, and Kevin Bell, both joining that research committee as well.
Is there any other questions that people want to either speak up or pop in the chat? We have a few more minutes. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us tonight and for tuning in to hear more about the research. It's great to hear from Marissa about volunteer opportunities. So I see Alice has popped a link in the chat if anyone else is interested. Or if anyone has any questions about anything that we spoke about today, you're welcome to email any of the members. So yeah, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Thanks, Kristen.
Great presentation. Thank you,
Thanks, Leanne.
everyone.
thanks.